Good morning, everyone. Today, we're diving deep, really deep, into a particularly dense and frankly brilliant passage from Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. We're looking at section 10 of the first chapter, famously titled Prejudices of Philosophers. Now, in this section, Nietzsche isn't just taking a casual glance. Oh no, he's putting contemporary philosophical obsessions under the microscope. Specifically, what he calls the problem of the real and the apparent world. But here's the kicker. He's less interested in the problem itself and far more interested in why philosophers are tackling it with such fervor, such intensity. Is it, as they might claim, a pure, disinterested will to truth? Or, and this is classic Nietzsche, are there other, perhaps darker, less acknowledged drives pulling the strings? As we've touched on before, Nietzsche's already been busy, hasn't he? Chipping away at this whole notion of a pure will to truth. Or, as he'd say in German, the Will zur Wahrheit. And it's vital to remember, right from the get-go, that Wahrheit isn't just truth in a bland textbook sense. No. The German term sings with connotations of genuineness, fidelity, even constancy. So, this will to truth, it might actually be a craving for something steadfast, something authentic. This adds such a fascinating layer to Nietzsche's critique, especially when he throws it up against what he calls pretty possibilities. He's laid the groundwork, you see, to expose those unacknowledged motivations, the hidden engines chugging beneath philosophical systems, particularly those old, creaky ones that rely on classic metaphysical divides. You know the type, the real versus the apparent. In this very segment, his critique of the will to Wahrheit gets even sharper, more nuanced. He starts to draw a line, a crucial distinction, between a potentially nihilistic form of this will and the motivations of what he calls stronger, livelier thinkers. These thinkers, he hints, are after something more like life affirmation. This throws a massive question right in our laps, isn't it? If the traditional will to truth is so often a prejudice, a bias, then what are the genuine wellsprings of philosophical inquiry, according to Nietzsche? And what alternatives, what escape routes does he offer, if traditional metaphysics is built on such shaky, flawed foundations? We're going to see him unleash his characteristic arsenal, genealogical inquiry, that's digging into the origins and conditions of beliefs, and razor-sharp psychological diagnosis to dissect these philosophical motives. And yes, we'll also touch upon those hierarchical distinctions he draws, which, let's be honest, can be problematic and demand our careful, critical eyes. This section, then, it's absolutely pivotal. Pivotal for understanding Nietzsche's grand project of revaluing values and for diagnosing the very pulse, the cultural currents of his time. Nietzsche kicks things off by noticing something in the air, a widespread philosophical preoccupation. He writes,
"All over Europe these days, the problem of the real and the apparent world gets taken up so eagerly and with such acuity, I would even say shrewdness, that you really start to think and listen."
But then, almost in the same breath, he casts a shadow of doubt on the motive everyone just assumes.
And anyone who hears only a will to truth in the background here certainly does not have the sharpest of ears.
This opening? It's pure, unadulterated Nietzsche. He spots a phenomenon, this intense, almost feverish focus on the split between appearance, shine, and reality. A problem with a very long shadow, of course, stretching all the way back to Plato's allegory of the cave, where the philosopher yearns to escape the flickering shadows of appearance for the brilliant light of true reality. And it's so important to remember that shine in the German philosophical tradition, especially for heavyweights like Kant and Hegel, isn't just simple illusion or mere semblance. It also carries the sense of shining, of radiance. So, when Nietzsche later talks about thinkers taking sides against appearance, a German reader might catch a far more intricate dance with this tradition, not just a flat-out rejection of superficiality. This questioning, this relentless probing, is a prime example of his genealogical inquiry in full swing. Nietzsche isn't just asking, "What is this idea?" No, he's digging deeper. Why this idea now? Who gains from it? What kind of person, what kind of simmering need does it actually serve? He's like a detective for ideas, isn't he? Tracing their ancestry, sniffing out their hidden motives. And this approach, it radically flips the script on how we evaluate philosophical positions. It's no longer just about logical coherence, or whether it matches some truth out there. Instead, it's about their perceived effects. Are they life-enhancing or life-denying? A game changer. So, what does he hear, if not that pure, pristine will to truth? He concedes with a characteristic twist.
In rare and unusual cases, some sort of will to truth might actually be at issue. Some wild and adventurous streak of courage, a metaphysician's ambition to hold on to a lost cause, that, in the end, will still prefer a handful of certainty to an entire wagon load of pretty possibilities.
And he continues, painting an even starker picture.
There might even be puritanical fanatics of conscience who would rather lie dying on an assured nothing than an uncertain something.
Now, listen to that language. Lost cause, a handful of certainty, and assured nothing. Or, in the German, that gewissen Nichts, so powerfully contrasted with an ungewissen etwas, an F, uncertain something. That desperate clinging to the gewissen Nichts, it screams of a profound need for fixity, a nuance that our simple English certainty almost smooths over. This is no celebration of the will to truth, make no mistake. Instead, Nietzsche delivers a psychological diagnosis, and it's a knockout punch.
But this is nihilism, and symptomatic of a desperate soul in a state of deadly exhaustion, however brave such virtuous posturing may appear.
Boom! The will to truth, in this particular twisted form, is utterly recharacterized. It's not some noble, heroic quest. It's a symptom of nihilism, a preference for the cold, empty void over the vibrant, messy, uncertain dance of life. This ties directly into one of Nietzsche's most persistent themes, the critique of life denial. This specific, desperate drive for certainty, he sees it as springing from exhaustion, from a soul that simply can no longer bear ambiguity, a soul on its last legs. From a psychoanalytic perspective, and why not play with this a bit, these puritanical fanatics of conscience who prefer an assured nothing, well, they could be seen as throwing up some pretty severe defense mechanisms against overwhelming anxiety. Think about it through a Freudian or Kleinian lens, for instance. This profound intolerance for uncertainty, could it trigger a kind of regressive defense? The assured nothing becomes a retreat, a desperate flight from the dizzying complexities of the external world, and perhaps from internal, libidinal chaos, into a state of psychic inertia, almost a paralysis. One could even argue it's a manifestation of thanatos, the death drive, tragically overpowering eros, the life instincts, and their metaphysician's ambition to hold on to a lost cause. Perhaps it's a compulsive repetition, a neurotic fixation on an object, certainty, that glitters with the promise of mastery but, in the end, delivers only emptiness. Their virtuous posturing, then, becomes a kind of reaction formation, a brave face papering over an abyss of underlying despair. This is a stark value judgment, isn't it? He's directly linking a philosophical stance to a psychological type, a hallmark of Nietzsche's own, very potent, indigenous psychology of decadence versus ascending life. The desperate soul in a state of deadly exhaustion is, for him, a clear profile of decadence, a weakening of the instincts, a pathological preference for stasis over dynamic, unpredictable becoming. Now, let's just hold that thought. Nietzsche is, in essence, putting certain philosophers on the couch, performing a psychological diagnosis. He's tethering their grand ideas to their supposed soul, their drives. And this diagnostic stance, often asserted with such unshakable confidence, exists in a fascinating, perhaps even uncomfortable, tension with his broader perspectivism, the idea that all views are, ultimately, interpretations. So, we have to ask, don't we, from what privileged vantage point, from what Archimedean point, does Nietzsche make his own seemingly unassailable claims about the instincts of others? What are the strengths, and yes, the dangers of this deeply incisive approach? Can we, for example, think of a philosopher whose work might be illuminated, or perhaps distorted, if we viewed it through such a psychological lens? That's a question worth wrestling with as we go deeper. So, having painted this rather bleak picture of a nihilistic, exhausted will to truth, Nietzsche then, with a flick of his rhetorical wrist, introduces a stunning contrast.
With stronger, livelier thinkers, however, thinkers who still have a thirst for life, things look different.
Ah, those words. Stärker, lebendiger, stronger, livelier. In German, they positively hum with a vitalistic resonance, don't they? They conjure up an active, vibrant, almost joyful engagement with life itself. What a stark contrast to the tödlichen Ermattung, the deadly exhaustion of that nihilistic soul we just encountered. This thirst for life, that's crucial. These thinkers, too, grapple with the appearance-reality puzzle. They also take sides.
Against appearance, and speaking about perspective in a newly arrogant tone, by granting their own bodies about as little credibility as they grant the visual evidence that says the earth stands still, and so, with seemingly good spirits, relinquishing their most secure possession. Since what do people believe in more securely these days than their bodies?
This nod to perspective is hugely significant. It's a wink towards Nietzsche's broader epistemological vision of perspectivism, the radical idea that all knowledge is conditioned by a particular viewpoint, that there's no absolute, God's eye, objective view of anything. These stronger thinkers, by daring to question even the supposedly solid evidence of their own bodies, seem to embrace this. Their arrogant tone when they speak of perspective suggests not just a dismissal of shine, of appearance, but perhaps a profound revaluation of it. Something new is stirring, but what's really driving them? What's their underlying motivation? Nietzsche speculates, using one of his characteristic rhetorical questions, a question that skillfully guides us toward his hypothesis.
Who knows whether they are not basically trying to reappropriate something that was once possessed even more securely, something from the old estate of a bygone faith, perhaps the immortal soul, or perhaps the old God. In short, ideas that helped make life a bit better, which is to say, stronger and more cheerful than modern ideas can do.
Now, this is a fascinating, almost counterintuitive turn. These skeptical anti-realists, as he'll dub them shortly, might actually be looking to the past, But, and this is key, not for its literal truth, not for dusty old doctrines, but for its life-enhancing power. The value of these old ideas, the immortal soul, the old God, lies not in their metaphysical accuracy, not in whether they're true in the old sense, but in their incredible ability to make life stronger and more cheerful. And this, of course, is a direct, stinging critique of modern ideas, which are implicitly, and rather damningly, judged as failing precisely in this most vital of tasks. Modernity, in this light, looks a bit anemic, doesn't it? From a Jungian analytical psychology perspective, these stronger, livelier thinkers almost seem to embody aspects of the individuation process. Their thirst for life, can we not see this as psychic energy, as libido, driving them towards self-realization, towards a fuller becoming? And their attempt to reappropriate something that was once possessed even more securely, the immortal soul, or the old God. This isn't necessarily a simple, straightforward regression to an earlier state. Oh no. Instead, it can be interpreted as a courageous attempt to reintegrate powerful, potent archetypal contents. Archetypes like the self or the God image, which have been so often devalued, even ridiculed, by the cold rationalism of T15. Modern ideas. This isn't a literal return to the past. It's a transformation of these ancient symbols to serve a renewed, invigorated life affirmation. And doesn't this resonate beautifully with Nietzsche's profound psychological insight that values, even truths, are often adopted, often cherished for their pragmatic, life-serving function? Fascinating. But here, right here, we bump up against one of those potentially thorny elements in Nietzsche's thought. That rather stark, hierarchical distinction he draws between these stronger, livelier thinkers and the desperate souls. This can certainly, and perhaps justifiably, be read as elitist, perhaps even dismissive of genuine intellectual struggle, or the kind of deep suffering that might understandably lead someone to desperately seek certainty, to crave an anchor in the storm. When we engage with Nietzsche, it's so important, isn't it, to acknowledge this tension, to contextualize it, yes, within his broader, sweeping critique of what he perceives as life-denying cultural trends, but also to critically, relentlessly, examine the ethical implications of such a hierarchy. Is this strength, he praises, an inherent trait, something you're born with? Or is it a capacity, a muscle that can be cultivated, developed? And it's also worth noting, just to add another layer of complexity, how different philosophical traditions might interpret these stronger thinkers. An existentialist reading, for instance, might zero in on their courageous creation of meaning, their authentic drive for self-transcendence. A post-structuralist, someone like Deleuze, might focus on their joyous affirmation of multiplicity, their playful creation of new interpretations, seeing their engagement with perspective as absolutely central to their project. So many angles. Now, one could, of course, offer an alternative spin on these stronger thinkers. Instead of viewing their intriguing interest in the older state of a bygone faith as some sophisticated future-oriented reappropriation, might it be something more straightforwardly conservative, or even, dare I say, a reactionary impulse, a wistful nostalgia for a lost, golden past, an inability, perhaps, to forge new, vibrant values from the challenging, often bewildering, conditions of modernity? Nietzsche himself, intriguingly, acknowledges a retrograde element when he later quips, "What do we care for their retrograde shortcut?" Or, in his German, retrograde, Abkürzung. And Abkürzung, it can also mean abbreviation or epitene. A subtle suggestion, perhaps, that this path back is a kind of condensed, overly simplistic way of dealing with the complexities of the present. If we choose to read them as primarily nostalgic, well, they suddenly become far less revolutionary, don't they? Less about that thrilling up and out he'll soon propose. This interpretation might gain traction if one focuses more on the historical context of deep disillusionment with modernity, rather than fully crediting Nietzsche's more complex, deeper psychological diagnosis. And this really highlights something crucial about Nietzsche's method: his reliance on interpreting motivations, a reliance that, by its very nature, can open up a whole spectrum of different hermeneutic pathways. The text breathes. The motivations of these stronger thinkers, then, are further clarified, sharpened.
There is a mistrust of these modern ideas here. There is a disbelief in everything built yesterday and today. Perhaps it is mixed with a bit of antipathy and contempt that can no longer stand the bric-a-brac of concepts from the most heterogeneous sources, which is how so-called positivism puts itself on the market these days. A disgust felt by the more discriminating taste at the funfair colours and flimsy scraps of all these reality philosophers, who have nothing new and genuine about them except these colours.
This is a full frontal assault on the intellectual currents of his day, isn't it? Particularly 19th century positivism. Nietzsche sees positivism as utterly superficial, a mere bric-a-brac of concepts. What a wonderfully dismissive phrase, Bigriff's plunder. He finds it aesthetically displeasing, like funfair colours and flimsy scraps. Cheap and nasty, and ultimately, profoundly inadequate. His critique here isn't just logical, it's visceral, it's aesthetic, it's existential. It reflects his radical challenge to conventional philosophical methodology, daring to incorporate aesthetic criteria like discriminating taste right into the heart of philosophical judgment. This antipathy and contempt he speaks of, this is absolutely crucial. It's utterly distinct from ressentiment. Theirs is an active disgust, born from a discriminating taste, an assertion of higher, more refined values. It's not that reactive sour grapes devaluation, born of impotence that so often characterizes ressentiment. No, this is different.
He goes on.
Here, I think, we should give these skeptical anti-realists and epistemo-microscopists their just due. The instinct that drives them away from modern reality is unassailable. What do we care for their retrograde shortcut?
The instinct driving them away from modern reality. He deems it unassailable.
Unassailable. That's a powerful, almost shocking assertion, relying entirely on the authority of instinct. Yet, and here's the rub, this very assertion that their instinct is unassailable, might it be seen as replacing one set of unexamined philosophical prejudices with another? Or perhaps, and this is very Nietzschean, it performatively enacts the kind of confident, self-assured assertion that Nietzsche himself values so highly, which, of course, requires us, as careful scholars, to remain critically vigilant, even of his most confident, most sweeping pronouncements. This critique of modernity, this palpable disgust with its shallow intellectual offerings, is a key recurring chord in Nietzsche's work, constantly portraying contemporary ideas as utterly insufficient for fostering a stronger and more cheerful life, a life worth living. So then, if these stronger thinkers are truly driven by this unquenchable thirst for life and a profound disgust with the cheap trinkets of modernity, and if their backward glance towards the old God is ultimately just a retrograde shortcut, a temporary fix, what is their true direction? Where are they really headed? Nietzsche concludes this dense passage with a powerful, electrifying, if somewhat enigmatic, flourish.
The essential thing about them is not that they want to go back, but rather that they want to get away.
Get away, hinway. And this away is then immediately intensified, supercharged.
A bit more strength, flight, courage, artistry, and they would want to get up and out and not go back.
Up and out. Hinauf and hinaus in the German. Can you feel the energy in that phrase? Its alliterative force, its incredible spatial dynamism. It just screams of ascent, of breaking free, of exiting some kind of confinement. It's suggestive of transcendence, of escape, perhaps even of that ultimate Nietzschean ideal, self-overcoming. It's not about a nostalgic return to a past faith in its old dusty form. No, it's a radical movement beyond the suffocating confines of both the old, exhausted metaphysics and the new, superficial, funfair modernity. And the qualities required for this epic movement: strength, flight, courage, artistry. These are the very qualities Nietzsche consistently, passionately valorizes. This points us, with thrilling anticipation, towards a new kind of philosopher, a new kind of philosophical project altogether, one where philosophy itself might courageously incorporate aesthetic and creative virtues right into its very core. Indeed, the aphoristic, almost poetic climax of this paragraph beautifully embodies the very artistry it praises. It's a performance in itself. However, one might critically ask, and we must always ask, what exactly does up and out truly signify? Is it a concrete, definable philosophical path? Or is it a beautifully aestheticized, perhaps dangerously elitist, ideal? An alternative reading, perhaps influenced by critical theory, might see this up and out as an aspirational, perhaps even fantastical escape route available only to a select, privileged few. A reading that might underplay the very real, very powerful structural constraints of modern reality that could, and often do, inhibit such a glorious ascent for many. And this, I think, highlights a persistent, fascinating tension in Nietzsche. The tension between offering profound, incisive cultural diagnosis and providing clearly articulated, truly accessible philosophical alternatives. It also touches upon a crucial methodological tension, doesn't it? He critiques the metaphysician's ambition for certainty, yet he posits this exhilarating ideal of going up and out, which, while not traditionally metaphysical in form, certainly possesses a transcendent quality, a quality that could, arguably, be seen as a new kind of philosophical ambition. What do you think? Let's pause for a moment and really consider the argumentative structure here, specifically concerning these stronger thinkers. It's quite elegant in its way. Nietzsche observes their critical, almost playful, engagement with appearance. From this, he infers a motivation rooted deeply in a thirst for life and a profound mistrust of modern, anemic ideas. He then suggests they look to older, perhaps archaic, ideas, not for their literal, dogmatic truth, but for their life-enhancing, spirit-lifting properties. A key implied assumption underpinning all of this, that modern ideas, especially the positivism he so despises, are fundamentally life-diminishing, and, consequently, that a philosophy's true value, its ultimate worth, lies in its capacity to enhance life, to make it richer, stronger, more vibrant. The grand conclusion, then, is that their engagement with the age-old problem of the real versus the apparent world is not primarily about truth in some traditional, dusty sense. No, it's about finding ingenious ways to reappropriate life-affirming values, with an ultimate, if perhaps often unrealized, desire for transcendence, for that magnificent up and out. The strength of this argument, it lies in its utterly compelling alternative explanation for philosophical motivations. It's electrifying. Its potential weakness, well, it relies heavily on Nietzsche's interpretations of motives, which are, by their very nature, notoriously difficult to verify, and, by his own perspectival criteria, are themselves interpretations. Food for thought. It's fascinating, too, to consider how the historical reception of this very passage, and indeed of Beyond Good and Evil more broadly, has itself shifted and evolved over time. Early 20th century readings, for instance, sometimes uncomfortably aligned Nietzsche with vitalism, or even suffered from gross misinterpretations involving proto-fascist ideas, a dark shadow. Then, mid-century, influential figures like Walter Kaufmann powerfully emphasized his radical critique of metaphysics and his potent existentialist themes, bringing a different Nietzsche to light. Later still, French post-structuralists, think Deleuze, think Foucault, brilliantly highlighted his perspectivism, his deconstruction of truth, his relentless dismantling of binaries, like real or apparent. This made this very passage's engagement with perspective and that bric-a-brac of concepts particularly salient, didn't it? And contemporary scholarship? Well, it's even more wonderfully diverse. We see naturalistic readings from philosophers like Leiter or Clarke, emphasizing Nietzsche's continuity with empirical psychology. Others continue to explore rich post-Kantian or Deleuzian threads. This historiographical lens, this awareness of how interpretations change, is so crucial. It reminds us, always, that our own interpretations are situated, are themselves perspectives from a certain time and place. Humbling, isn't it? Furthermore, this passage has truly significant, even revolutionary, meta-philosophical implications. Just think, it completely reconceives philosophy. It's no longer presented as some disinterested, objective pursuit of abstract truth. Instead, philosophy emerges as an activity deeply, inextricably intertwined with life, with health, with psychological type. Its value, its ultimate justification, lies in its capacity to affirm and enhance life. Full stop. It shatters the traditional, neat boundaries between philosophical subdisciplines. Epistemology becomes tangled up with ethics. The will to truth itself is evaluated by its life consequences. Metaphysics gets fused with psychology. The real versus apparent problem is reframed as fundamentally a psychological issue. And the text itself, it performs a revaluation. It uses loaded, evocative language to persuade, to move us, through effective and aesthetic means, not just through cold, hard logic. In doing so, it throws down a profound challenge to the very style, the very voice of conventional philosophical prose. This performative dimension, this stirring call to get up and out, aims to do more than just inform. It aims to move the reader, to incite a yearning, a desire for the very type of vibrant, life-affirming philosopher it so passionately valorizes. It's an invitation. So, to try and synthesize what we've journeyed through in this incredibly rich, challenging passage, Nietzsche presents us with two starkly contrasting responses to this perennial problem of the real and the apparent world. On one hand, we have those unfortunate souls driven by what he diagnoses as a nihilistic will to truth, a desperate, almost pathetic, grasping for certainty that he sees as symptomatic of an exhausted, depleted soul. This is a clear, powerful continuation and a significant sharpening of his critique of the Will zur Wahrheit as a foundational, often unexamined, prejudice of philosophers. Then, On the other hand, he identifies these, quote, stronger, livelier thinkers. Their engagement with appearance and perspective, though it might seem skeptical on the surface, is actually motivated by a profound thirst for life and a deep, visceral dissatisfaction with anemic, modern ideas. These thinkers, he suggests, look to the past, but not for literal truth, not for dogma. They look for life-enhancing power, with an underlying, irrepressible impulse to move away from the suffocating confines of the present, and ideally, thrillingly, up and out. Throughout this intricate analysis, Nietzsche employs his distinctive, often radical, philosophical methods. We've seen his genealogical inquiry in action, haven't we? As he relentlessly questions the stated motives, the glossy PR behind so many philosophical preoccupations. We've witnessed his sharp, sometimes brutal psychological diagnosis as he attributes philosophical positions to underlying states of soul, to desperation or thirst for life. A method that, while undeniably insightful, also invites our critical reflection on its own epistemological grounding, especially within a perspectival framework. And, of course, we've seen a powerful, sweeping critique of modernity, particularly of positivism, which he ruthlessly deems superficial, aesthetically offensive, and utterly incapable of fostering a strong, cheerful, vibrant existence. His underlying perspectivism is the very lens that allows him to treat these diverse philosophical stances not as competing claims to some absolute final truth, but as profound expressions of different life orientations, different ways of being in the world. The recurring concepts we've tracked, that slippery will to truth, the classic real versus apparent world dichotomy, the stinging critique of modern ideas, and that fundamental evaluative axis of life affirmation versus life denial or nihilism. They all intersect here in this very passage, revealing the astonishing complexity of Nietzsche's grand revaluation project. The problematic, perhaps troubling, hierarchical distinction he draws between types of thinkers serves as a constant, necessary reminder of the need for our own critical engagement with his work, a careful balancing act between historical contextualization and rigorous ethical assessment. The text also, in a very real sense, psychologically engages us, the readers. It challenges our self-perceptions, doesn't it? It makes us question our own intellectual motivations, and perhaps even creates a kind of cognitive dissonance that spurs us on to deeper, more personal interpretation. It's not a comfortable read, nor should it be. As we move forward, Nietzsche's electrifying call to get up and out leaves us dangling with a profoundly significant question. What new forms of philosophy, what new modes of valuation might this actually entail? Does he begin to sketch these new, uncharted paths? Or does he continue, for now, to focus his immense energy on dismantling the old, decaying ones? This passage challenges every single one of us to consider not only the content of philosophical ideas, but also, and perhaps more importantly, the life impulses from which they spring. What drives our thinking? For our next session, I'd really like you to chew on these questions. Mull them over. 1. Nietzsche suggests these stronger, livelier thinkers might try to reappropriate the old God, or the immortal soul. Not for their literal truth, mind you, but for their life-enhancing power. Now, how might a contemporary philosopher, someone deeply critical of traditional metaphysics, yet desperately seeking life affirmation, engage with such bygone concepts today? What on earth might that actually look like in practice? 2. If, as Nietzsche so powerfully implies, philosophical positions
are deeply, almost biologically, intertwined with psychological types and their thirst for life, or, chillingly, their lack thereof. How does this explosive idea affect the cherished ideal of philosophy as a collaborative, communal search for truth? Can these radically different types ever meaningfully engage with each other? Or are they, perhaps tragically, destined to misunderstand, to talk past each other? 3. Nietzsche's scathing critique of modern ideas and positivism as a mere bric-a-brac of concepts relies heavily on an aesthetic judgment. Remember, discriminating taste, those fun-fair colors. So, what are the implications, the possibilities, and perhaps the dangers of incorporating such aesthetic criteria right into the heart of philosophical evaluation? How might this challenge, or perhaps even enrich, contemporary philosophical practice? Think about these. Really think. And we'll dive into them together next time. And that concludes our rather intense examination of this truly challenging, but oh so rewarding, passage from Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. Phew. If you found this deep dive into Nietzsche's critique of philosophical motivations clarifying, or if it just provoked further thought, maybe sparked some new ideas, please do consider giving this lecture a like, sharing it with fellow students of philosophy, or with anyone at all who's intrigued by the whirlwind that is Nietzsche, would also be a fantastic way to extend this conversation. To continue exploring such foundational philosophical questions and texts with us in future lectures, and we have so much more to explore, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And of course, the questions I'd left you with. Regarding the reappropriation of past ideas for present strength, the complex dialogue, or lack thereof, between different psychological types in philosophy, and the controversial place of aesthetic judgment in our field, well, these are absolutely prime material for our ongoing discussion. I sincerely, genuinely, invite you to share your initial responses, any further questions you have, or any interpretations that were sparked by today's lecture in the comments below. Engaging with your perspectives, your insights, your challenges, that's what helps build this vibrant community of inquiry. Thank you, truly, for your engagement today.